Right, so great. Welcome everybody to day 3 of the 2022 British Association for Psychological Type Conference. It's a Saturday, so I'm delighted that so many people have turned out to spend their time talking about type on a Saturday. And also that we've got people from all over the world, which is fantastic. So I'm really pleased to introduce Teodora Paucean, who will be speaking to us for the first time. So it's her first time at a BAPT conference. So really pleased to have her here. She's a personal development coach. She'll tell you a bit more about her background. But yeah, I'm looking forward to learning more about Enneagram. So over to you, Teodora.
Thank you very much, Catherine, and thank you everyone for deciding to join me today. As mentioned earlier, I'm going to talk about the complementary power of two personality systems that I really love. On the one hand, the cognitive functions, on the other hand, the Enneagram. So basically, how do we put these two together in a way that creates more clarity in our self-development process and self-awareness process? So for starters, just to tell you a little bit about myself, I'm from Romania, Eastern Europe. That's where I was born and raised. And that is also where my passion for typology started. I was about 16 years old when I discovered a book in my INTJ father's library, a book that talked about type and temperament. And I got completely hooked. Like there had been nothing ever before that interested me as much. So fast forward a couple of years later, I decided to go and study psychology at York University in the UK. So I lived there for 3 years. And then afterwards, I decided to come back to Romania and do a master's in conflict management. But basically, during both of these degrees, I started doing some research on the correlation between personality dimensions and emotional resilience. I started this during my bachelor's degree and continued it during my conflict management master's degree. Basically, I used the big 5 because that was more accessible and more accepted by my professors. Unfortunately, other personality systems were not as encouraged in research, at least. Then over the next few years, I continued my education in psychodrama, psychotherapy, in training and in life coaching. And I started gaining experience in human resources, on the one hand in recruitment and on the other hand in training and learning and development. And then in 2020, I decided to start my own business. And ever since, I've been a freelance trainer and coach focused on 4 different areas: communication skills, public speaking skills, career mentoring, so kind of coupled with my background in human resources, and general personal growth. And typology is kind of in the background in everything that I do, the cognitive functions and the Enneagram together. So the agenda for today's presentation. Initially, we will discuss the concept of self-awareness and basically the correlation or the link that I see between the process that one goes through and typology. Next, we will discuss insights from cognitive functions that people can get in their self-growth journey. And similarly, we will do the same for the Enneagram. After discussing the 2 sides together, we will look at the interplay between these 2 systems, at the correlations and the complementary power, and the reason why I believe that using both of this together can really enhance and deepen our understanding of ourselves and of other people as well. Next, I'm going to share some of my personal observations with you. So these are not scientific, they're just patterns that I have noticed in my conversations with people and in my personal life as well. And I'm also going to share a few examples and case studies. So basically, if someone has the same MBTI type or the same cognitive functions, let's say that we have 2 ENTJs, but they have a different Enneagram type, what does this mean and how do things change in their focus, in their self-growth journey? We will wrap things up, and then at the end, I estimate we will have about 10-15 minutes for questions. But if you do have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to write them in the chat, and I will collect them at the end and discuss them with you. Okay, so I'd like you to imagine a huge dark forest. A forest that represents the human mind in all its forms. Every cognitive function, every personality trait, every thought, every emotion, every behavior, every attitude. So everything there is or there could be in the human consciousness. Now, I see this forest as, an environment where people can turn the light on in different areas. So, perhaps I turn the light here, and that's my ego. That's my identity. That's the part of myself that I understand, that I am aware of, that I present to the world, and that other people see as well. Maybe this is my type, or maybe not, if at this point in time I'm not aware of it, but it's my identity. Now, what happens with the rest of the forest? What about all of these other areas where one might turn the light on? And the reason why I'm asking you this question is because I've noticed that a lot of people who get interested in typology do it because something happens. There is a trigger that occurs. And here I'm talking about people who decide to study typology on their own. So they're not introduced to it by someone else. They just start doing research and trying to understand it for themselves. So this trigger occurs from somewhere in the dark forest, from a part of themselves that is not yet, conscious to them, a part that is not yet accessible to them. And that is when people say, okay, something is not right. Maybe I'm unhappy with my career, or maybe I'm unhappy with my personal relationships, or there's something that really bothers me. And this prompts questioning. It prompts the willingness to say, okay, I want to clarify what's really going on. And some of these people get into typology, they discover their preferences, hopefully also their cognitive functions and their Enneagram type sometimes. Okay, so if someone does decide to, get deeper into the cognitive function model or the MBTI or the temperament model, what can they learn from this process? Well, we all know that initially, understanding our type can be incredibly insightful when it comes to understanding our natural tendencies. So why am I more abstract, and why is my conversation partner more concrete? Maybe in the past, I used to think that we could just not get along, but now I understand what's going on and I learn to appreciate the differences. Understanding these differences can, of course, increase our flexibility, our tolerance, our ability to get along better with more and more people. And specifically when it comes to communication, I believe that the interaction style model by Linda Burns and the associated theories can be incredibly helpful. Let's say that we have two people interacting with each other, one who has a preference for a direct communication style, and then another one that has a preference for an informative communication style. Let's say we have an ESTP who's direct, and then we have an ISFJ who's informative. So if they talk to each other, sometimes they might get frustrated at each other, especially at work. Maybe the ESTP will say, well, can't you just get to the point? Stop giving me all of these details. I'm looking to understand what the answer to my specific question was. And they might feel like the informative type or the ISFJ is not involved enough or interested enough to fix the problem. This could be one of the assumptions, okay? On the other hand, for the ISFJ, who has an informative communication style, it might feel like their conversation partner is trying to push them into a direction. They might feel like, the other person is trying to control them. We also know that ESTPs are a control type. So this dynamic can be challenging to navigate. And I know Catherine has written a really nice book about how to get along with anyone using this model. And I think it's a really powerful way to look at it. If we understand type and we understand the interaction style, then it becomes much easier to say, okay, let me take some steps to match your energy, to match your communication style, to work better with you. When it comes to, the difference between intuition and sensing, two people having a different preference here. This happens all the time, and I'm sure you've come across it a lot in your lives as well. If the intuitive is being too abstract in their speech and the sensing type is being more concrete, they might struggle to find common ground. I know I have struggled with this a lot in the past, where people have been telling me like, can you just give an example? I can't follow these random ideas. And I've learned that, especially if I talk to a sensing type, but sometimes with other people too, it's helpful and useful for everyone and for the clarity of the conversation to also give examples. And the opposite happens as well. Maybe the sensing type will say, well, it would be lovely to kind of put things into perspective and share the big picture idea as well, because then the conversation kind of improves and flows better. Okay, so these are some of the insights that we can get from the cognitive functions and the interaction style. What about the Enneagram? I think that in our personal growth journey, the Enneagram is more powerful when it comes to the emotional content. So we understand things like fears and motivations. We know that every Enneagram type has a specific fear. For example, type 2 might fear that they do not deserve to be loved. And because of this, their motivation is to anticipate the needs of other people, to help other people continuously, because they feel like if they don't, they do not deserve to receive love in return. Now, this might be something that the type 2 has been struggling with for a long period of time. And after some time, they realize that, oh, this is where this comes from. This is the belief that I have kind of constructed this emotional component on, or this reaction. At the same time, we can look at things such as learned behavior. Some Enneagram theorists say that it's possible to get our Enneagram type from our parents, or at least to get a specific component. If we go more in depth with the theory, we see that we not only have one type, that is our dominant type or our core type, similarly to how we have a dominant cognitive function, but there's more to the picture, and perhaps some subcategories also come from our parents. By learned behavior, I also mean mirroring things. So we see our parents or our caregivers, especially in our early childhood, reacting in a specific way. And then we say, okay, I need to react like this. I'm a type 2, a giver, and I've learned that I need to anticipate the needs of my parents because that will create a better connection between us. So, we speak more about nurture here, about how our experiences also shape us. Another really important component is emotional suppression. So the Enneagram, and particularly the Rizzo and Hudson perspective over it, talks about the fact that the types all struggle with a specific emotion. Types 2, 3, and 4 are shame types. This means that they're trying to suppress the feeling of shame or embarrassment in order to build their identity. Types 5, 6, and 7 struggle with anxiety, which means that they're trying to suppress their fear and consequently find safety and security. And then types 8, 9, and 1 are rage types. So this means they're trying to suppress their anger to make sure they stay in control. They stay independent and autonomous. Now, when it comes to relationships, I talked about how the interaction styles can help us, and I think the Enneagram brings another really valuable input. And here I'm referring to triggers and attitudes. So, for instance, type 8 or type 7 or type 3, they are all assertive types. So this means that when they are in some sort of a context, maybe at work, maybe in their relationships as well, they tend to move against people in order to get their needs met. So they are more assertive, more direct, they are more likely to ask for what they want, and they're more likely to take on a leadership role. We have other types like 9 or 5 or 4 that are withdrawn. So they're more likely to isolate, retract, and be in their own world in order to get their needs met. And then we have types 1, 2, and 6, compliant types. So types that are more likely to focus on doing things for other people and to kind of adapt themselves to the needs of other people in order to get their needs met. So imagine if you put these people together, if they have a personal relationship or a close professional relationship, they might trigger each other and they might annoy each other. Assertive types are often called bossy, even though they might not intend to be bossy, or conflictual. Maybe they're not really. Withdrawn types are sometimes called out for not wanting to participate or engage more, even though that's not necessarily the case. So again, if we understand more about this, it becomes easier to connect with each other. Okay, the next part is about how we deal with emotions. And here I don't mean feeling, I mean emotions, okay? So we have positive outlook types who are more likely to be optimistic and prioritize positive emotions. So types 2, 7, and 9 are in this category. Then we have reactive types that are likely to react strongly to events that happen, both in a positive and a negative way. These are types 6, 4, and 8. And then we have competency-focused types 1, 3, and 5, that are more likely to detach themselves from emotions and say, we need to make an objective decision. We need to kind of dissociate from what, causes us stress. Again, if you put these people together, sometimes they annoy each other. The positive outlook type might say to the reactive type, well, why are you making such a big drama out of everything? Let's just be happy and enjoy life. And then the reactive type might tell to the positive type, well, you're not acknowledging the real problems. You're being too happy, too nice. You have to deal with what's actually going on. And sometimes we tend to take things personally unless we discuss and understand what's actually going on. So again, it's a matter of flexibility and tolerance. So what happens when we put these two together? What is the interplay between these two systems? Now, what's here on the slide is basically my opinion and the way that I see this unfolding, because there's a lot of debate in the community and not enough scientific research for a conclusion. But basically, I see it like this. So we have a set of cognitive functions. These cognitive functions bias our perception of the world. Then we have experiences, and these experiences are related to whatever happens to us in our lives. The experience itself is objective, but because of our bias in perception, we interpret these experiences in a specific way. And perhaps this is how our Enneagram type is formed. Now, this is why there are correlations between the two systems, and we will see also what some of the scientific studies say about this. But basically, if you are a specific type, or if you have certain cognitive functions, you are more likely to develop a specific Enneagram type and less likely to develop another one. However, when we have a less typical pairing, this can explain why certain people have more difficulty finding their type or finding their cognitive functions and so on and so forth. We can have an ESTJ Enneagram 9, my uncle, for example, and a lot of people at first sight would say that he's an ESFJ or an ISTJ because 9 is more common in introverts and in feelers. And when we do see the actual, combination, it becomes a little bit easier to say, okay, this is why you don't fit the general stereotypes associated with a type. This is why we might need a little bit more nuance to the whole story. And this is kind of like a representation of how I imagine the relationship between the two systems. So the skeleton represents our cognitive functions, okay, our type. This is the structure that we operate on. This is our stable self. The Enneagram, I see more as a soul, as a motivator, as something that moves the skeleton, something that gives life to the skeleton, something that shows fears and motivations, something that makes the skeleton want things, look for things, desire things, want to get away from other things. And of course, there's multiple ways in which you can see the relationship. This is just my perspective through my own cognitive function bias, perhaps. But what I believe is important as a conclusion to get out of this system or this idea is that the two systems interact with each other. So they have a relationship and interplay. They influence each other, but they are not the same thing. And they also measure slightly different things or talk about slightly different things. And this is why I believe understanding more nuance can clarify things. I remember at some point Carl Jung was saying that his typology was aiming to kind of place people on a spectrum and understand the variety in the way the minds work. I believe that if we add the Enneagram to the functions, this, let's say, rainbow where everyone is placed gets a bit more detail and a bit more, it becomes a bit more clear. It's as if we don't just say we are red, but we are burgundy instead. There's more nuance there. Okay, so before we go further, I would like to ask you if you know your Enneagram type. Now, I see some of you have already written it, and Catherine has prepared a poll, has helped me with a poll here. So just quickly, yes, no, or I'm not sure.
Okay, so I've just launched the poll. You should be able to see that. I don't think I can answer it myself, but my answer is no.
No. Okay. Okay. So we've got about 80% of people who know their type and about 20% of people who don't know their type. Okay. I think that's good. Thank you. Now,
sorry, I'll stop sharing. Here we go.
Yeah, that's okay. So for those of you who do know your Enneagram type, what is your 4-letter code, MBTI type, and what is your Enneagram type? And maybe if you can write it in the chat, that would be very helpful. Just came out so I can see the chat as well. Or maybe Catherine, if you can help me with just reading through.
There we go. Yeah, I've unmuted myself. Right. Jerry, INTJ +9.
Okay.
Joe Arrigo, INTJ 5, wing 6. Oops, hang on. It's going up too fast for me. Pun, INFJ 1. Anna, INFJ 4 with wing 5. Harumi, ENFJ 6. Sue Blair, ESTJ 2 with a social wing 3. I've done Anna's, I think. Andy is ISFP 9, wing 8.
Okay. Right, right. This is helpful because basically a lot of your answers kind of fit into this example list. So what I've done here is I have given one example for each type of an Enneagram type that is often associated with it. This is not the only one. So let's say that we have ESFJ Enneagram 2. ESFJ Enneagram 3 or ESFJ Enneagram 6, these are also very likely combinations, okay? We also have INTP Enneagram 5, but INTP Enneagram 9 is also very, very possible. ENTJ Enneagram 3, and then some other very popular pairings would be ENTJ Enneagram 8 or ENTJ Enneagram 1. So for each type, there's a few Enneagram types that kind of pop up that become very likely. I've cited 2 sources below. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of data in terms of the specific pairings. But so far, these are the patterns that emerge, and they make sense. For example, Enneagram 2 is the helper or the giver. ESFJ is the extroverted feeling hero type. So, you know, the helper and the giver does fit quite well with the extroverted feeling energy. ENFP Enneagram 7 is very common. 7 is the enthusiast. Again, something that often fits with the extroverted intuition. So these are a few examples of very likely, very common pairings. We also have less common pairings. Okay, and I've created a list here. There's more. I've just added one type again. But what I feel like mentioning is that currently there's a debate here, both in the online typology community and also in science so far. The question or the debate is it possible for these combinations to occur? Some people say that it's not, and that there's likely that some mistake has occurred, either with the functions or with the Enneagram. Some people say actually it's possible to have any combination because the 2 systems measure something different from each other. My opinion is more aligned with the second option, that any combination is possible. It's just that some are very likely, they happen all the time, and some are slightly less likely. And I think the reason for this is related to life experiences or situations, okay, that we've kind of stumbled across in our lives and that have kind of changed or shifted our perspective. And again, this can kind of explain why certain people can mistype because of this. So if we have an ISFP Enneagram 8, they are likely to mistype as a TJ type because 8 is commonly associated with TE. Or an ESTJ Enneagram 2 might mistype as an ESFJ because the Enneagram 2 is commonly found in extroverted feeling types. Okay, now I'm going to move on and talk about some of my personal observations. Again, like I said at the beginning, they are just my personal observations. They're not necessarily like science-based or statistic-based. So if we look at certain types, and then what kind of system do they prefer more, or what kind of system are they more drawn to? TP types, so types that score high on introverted thinking, ENTP, ESTP, INTP, ISTP. I've noticed they tend to be more drawn to the cognitive function model on average, of course, doesn't apply to every single person. And I think the reason for this is that the cognitive function model or the MBTI or the temperaments, they have a more TI-like structure. It's kind of easy to sort through the information using introverted thinking to kind of categorize information and create this theory. On the other hand, FB types, so types that score high on introverted feelings, seem to be more drawn to the Enneagram, at least if they know about it. And the reason why is because, you know, the Enneagram talks a lot about fears and motivations and emotional content as well. So because of that, they might kind of, you know, resonate more with this approach. I've talked to several FB types who said, well, I don't really want to be labeled. And I feel like if I find my type, this labels me. And sometimes they find more space when it comes to the Enneagram or more flexibility, because it feels like they can kind of expand and understand how everything is connected in terms of their inner emotional life. For FJ types, here I would say the pattern is not as clear, like some seem to be more drawn to the functions, some to Enneagram, some to both. And I believe this is because they have introverted thinking is in their main 4 functions, but they're also interested and in touch with the feeling function. So perhaps this could explain why. And then for TJ types, so types that score high on extroverted thinking, again, I noticed that they like the functions more on average. They are more attracted to this thinkery system, but they start seeing Enneagram as a tool to access their introverted feeling, to understand more about it. Okay, my next set of observations refers to different uses, potentially, for different types to strengthen several functions. So, for instance, like I said before, for types that score high on extroverted thinking, so TJ types, Enneagram can be seen as a tool to strengthen their introverted feeling. So if TJ types say, okay, I have a way to think about my introverted feeling, to understand more about values and fears and motivations and so on and so forth, maybe this can be a way in which I can do it. For FJ types, so types that score high on extroverted feeling, but who do have introverted thinking in their main 4 functions as a child or as an inferior function, they might like to use the MBTI or the function model to strengthen their introverted thinking. Again, because using a system like this can provide them with more clarity with respect to how the mind works and how all of these functions are grouped with each other. All of these categories work with each other. Something interesting, this is something I've kind of put up together after reflecting about it with respect to TP types, so types that score high on introverted thinking. I've noticed that sometimes Enneagram can be a tool for their TI to think about FI. So what I mean by that is FI is not the TP's natural function. It's their blind spot or their demon function. So it's not a function that they love or that comes the most naturally to them. So sometimes understanding the Enneagram as a system, as a theoretical framework, can provide them with a tool to think about their FI. And perhaps the opposite pattern or the reverse pattern can happen for FP types that score high on introverted feeling and who have introverted thinking, again, as a trickster or a demon function. Because the function model can provide more structure to this FI. Okay, and then the last personal observation refers to the idea that perhaps our Enneagram type can kind of nuance our functions. It can give us more clarity with respect to where we are on this rainbow that I was talking about earlier. So I'm going to share a few examples here with you. What do I mean with this? Let's say that we have two ENTJs, one being an Enneagram 3 and one being an Enneagram 6. Enneagram 3 is also called the achiever. Enneagram 3 is a type that values achievement and having great results and having an outstanding performance. So in their personal growth journey, the ENTJ 3s tend to focus more on performance-related challenges. What do I do in order to improve my performance at work? What kind of skills should I develop in order to, have better results in whatever field I'm working on? And this is a pattern that I've noticed as well in my professional experience so far, as well as in my personal life. When it comes to communication skills, again, something I picked up on is that this combination might be more interested in improving communication skills with application to the workplace. So, translated into the question of how can I better interact or how can I better communicate with my clients, with my coworkers, with my superiors, and so on and so forth. ENTJ Enneagram 6. Now, 6 is also called the loyalist. The loyalist is part of the fear triad, like I mentioned at the beginning. And this type struggles more with anxiety aspects. So they might be more interested in wanting to clarify what their stressors are. How do I deal with my stressors? How do I deal with the things that kind of put me under pressure? And also, if they do want to work on their communication skills, this tends to take more of a personal life focus rather than a professional life focus, because Enneagram 6 prioritizes having a smaller circle where they feel safe, where they feel like they have created a safety net. ENTP, Enneagram 3 and Enneagram 7. These are both likely combinations or likely pairings. Like I said earlier, 3 is the achiever. So again, we notice a tendency to want to focus more on dealing with work-related challenges and a stronger focus on building self-esteem. And what do I mean by this? Well, because Enneagram 3 is an identity type, they have a stronger focus, like the 2 and the 4, to focus on building their self-esteem, building their confidence, because this is something that this Enneagram type considers to be very important. ENTP Enneagram 7 tends to have a stronger need to clarify where they want to go or what they want to do. Why? Well, 7 is called the enthusiast, and this is a type that really enjoys exploring different paths or different potentials, asking, what if I do this? What if I do that? What's a potential way in which I could go? Could it be this path or the other path? And so on and so forth. So clarifying which road they want to go onto and building this decisiveness and discipline is something that they often look for, which is slightly different than the Enneagram 3 ENTP combination. Now, also some introverts. So ISTP Enneagram 5 and ISTP Enneagram 6. 5 is called the investigator, a type that is very common in introverts and thinkers. INTP, ISTP, INTJ, ISTJ. Here I've noticed that because of the intellectual cerebral nature of the Enneagram 5, and the importance that this type places on wanting to clarify things mentally first and gathering, let's say, information before they do anything else. There seems to be a stronger focus here on wanting to discuss theory, whether that's theory of public speaking or theory of communication or theory of type, to make sure that they have a thorough understanding of a topic. And they want to do this before they start working on concrete skills, even though, you know, the ISTP is a sensing type, so it does enjoy concrete experience. When it comes to the ISTP Enneagram 6, again, like with the ENTJ Enneagram 6, there's a stronger focus on dealing with stressors, because 6 is an anxiety type that wants to find safety and security as a strong motivation. And we also notice a stronger interest in exploring personal relationships. Again, because the 6 is looking to create a safe environment in their closer circles. So because of that, finding those, you know, good, positive, encouraging personal relationships can be a very important component in their self-growth journey, something that they consider to be important. ISFJ, Enneagram 1 and Enneagram 5. Enneagram 1 is called the perfectionist. This is a type that prioritizes doing things very well, making sure that they reach a high standard in everything that they do. So because of this, they might spend a little bit longer to complete things, you know, because they just want to make it perfect. So because of that, they might want, or they might be interested to work more on improving their time management skills, to make sure they are prioritizing things in a way that suits their careers or their teams, and so on and so forth. And also because 1 is a type that tends to be quite critical of themselves and other people too. Creating this focus on building tolerance for different approaches is also something that I've noticed this pairing often looks for. When it comes to ISFJ Enneagram 5, similarly to the ISTP Enneagram 5, so again, we have an investigator here, there is again a strong interest in deepening their knowledge on a variety of theoretical topics, and a stronger desire to use their analytical skills to self-reflect, perhaps even a stronger interest to use their introverted thinking child function to engage with it and see what kind of inputs arise from this. And my last example looks at ISFP, Enneagram 4 and Enneagram 9, both quite likely, quite common combinations. Enneagram 4 is also known as the individualist or the romantic. And this type, again, seems to be more interested in building self-esteem because 4 is an identity type. At the same time, the Enneagram 4 ISFP tends to have a stronger interest in developing emotional management skills. And the reason for this, if you remember the beginning of the presentation, I was mentioning that 4 is a reactive type. So this means they tend to have stronger emotional reactions to things, whether positive or negative. And sometimes this combination says, okay, I'm really looking forward or looking into how do I handle my reactions to certain events if I'm unhappy with them? How do I make sure that I don't get too angry or too expressive when it's not the right moment? And the ISFP Enneagram 9. 9 is also called a peacemaker. This is a type that often looks to detach themselves from conflict, whether this is internal conflict or external conflict. So because of this, in their self-growth journey, they might prioritize or they might want to prioritize developing conflict management skills rather than running away or avoiding conflictual situations. And again, because 9 is also a type that is called to be withdrawn, sometimes this combination works better or enjoys a training or a coaching process better if they have more time for reflection and integration of the things they have learned, to kind of, let things settle, be integrated, be clarified to the self. Okay, so just to sum up, the topics that we have covered today are, first of all, looking at the functions and at the Enneagram as two separate systems that can both provide people with a lot of insights in their self-awareness journey, as well as a degree of overlap between them. So yes, there is a relationship, there are some correlations, but they're not entirely the same thing. And it's possible to have quite a lot of variety. Because of this variety, we can have different interests or different motivations for people to explore in their personal growth journey. And because I'm a strong believer myself in the importance of combining the two systems, I really hope that future research will focus more on integrating the two together. I am planning to get more involved in this area myself. And before we get to the Q&A session, I would like to leave you with a quote that has always inspired me from Carl Jung, who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have or anything else you would like to discuss. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment.
Okay, and I'll just stop recording as